Krishna, Krishna. Is this other second microphone ready to go?
Yes. You want to start?
Dedication. To my father Gaur Mohan De, a pure devotee of Krishna who raised me as a Krishna-conscious child from the beginning of my life. In my boyhood ages, he instructed me how to play the mridanga. He gave me Radha Krishna Vigraha to worship, and he gave me Jagannath Rath to duly observe the festival as my childhood play. He was kind to me, and I imbibed from him the ideas later on solidified by my spiritual master, the Eternal Father.
I think we need a little more volume for her.
Let's.
More.
Yeah, okay.
So now, do I read words from Apple or the introduction?
Yeah, let's hear what George has to say.
Everybody is looking for Krishna. Some don't realize that they are, but they are. Krishna is God, the source of all that exists, the cause of all that is, was, or ever will be. As God is unlimited, he has many names. Allah, Buddha, Jehovah, Rama. All are Krishna, all are one. God is not abstract. He has both the impersonal and the personal aspects to his personality, which is supreme, eternal, blissful, and full of knowledge. As a single drop of water has the same qualities as an ocean of water, so has our consciousness the qualities of God's consciousness. But through our identification and attachment with material energy, physical body, sense pleasures, material possessions, ego, etc., our true transcendental consciousness has been polluted, and like a dirty mirror, it is unable to reflect a pure image. With many lives, our association with the temporary has grown. This impermanent body of a bag of bones and flesh is mistaken for our true self, and we have accepted this temporary condition to be final. Through all ages, great saints have remained as living proof that this non-temporary, permanent state of God consciousness can be revived in all living souls. Each soul is potentially divine. Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, steady in the self, being freed from all material contamination, the yogi achieves the highest perfectional stage of happiness, in touch with the supreme consciousness. Yoga, a scientific method for God, self-realization, is the process by which we purify our consciousness, stop further pollution, and arrive at the state of perfection, full knowledge, full bliss. If there's a God, I want to see him. It's pointless to believe in something without proof, and Krishna consciousness and meditation are methods where you can actually obtain God perception. You can actually see God and hear him, play with him. It might sound crazy, but he is actually there, actually with you. There are many yogic paths, Raja, Jnana, Hatha, Kriya, Karma, Bhakti, which are all acclaimed by the masters of each method. Swami Bhaktivedanta is, as his title says, a Bhakti yogi following the path of devotion. By serving God through each thought, word, and deed, and by chanting his holy names, the devotee quickly develops God consciousness. By chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, one inevitably arrives at Krishna consciousness. The proof of the pudding is in the eating. I request that you take advantage of this book, Krishna, and enter into its understanding. I also request that you make an appointment to meet your God now through the self-liberating process of yoga, union, and give peace a chance. All you need is love, Krishna. Haribol. Introduction by Srila Prabhupada. Krishna, 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 He. Krishna, 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 He. Krishna, 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 Raksha Mam. Krishna, 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 Pahi Mam. Rama Raghava, Rama Raghava, Rama Raghava, Raksha Mam. Krishna Keshava, Krishna Keshava, Krishna Keshava, Pahi Mam.
Now, just to clarify, I see a preface.
Is that first? Yeah. Okay.
That's first, right?
Okay. Preface. Nivrita Tarsher Upagyamanad Bhavo Sadat Shrotra Mano Bhiramat Ka Uttama Sloka Gunanuvadat Puman Virajeta Vina Pashugnat. In the Western countries, when someone sees the cover of a book like Krishna, he immediately asks, who is Krishna? Who is the girl with Krishna, etc.? The immediate answer is that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. How is that? Because he conforms in exact detail to descriptions of the Supreme Being, the Godhead. In other words, Krishna is the Godhead because he is all attractive. Outside the principle of all attraction, there is no meaning to the word Godhead. How is it one can be all attractive? First of all, if one is very wealthy, if he has great riches, he becomes attractive to the people in general. Similarly, if someone is very powerful, he also becomes attractive. And if someone is very famous, he also becomes attractive. And if someone is very beautiful or wise or unattached to all kinds of possessions, he also becomes attractive. So from practical experience, we can observe that one is attractive due to wealth, power, fame, beauty, wisdom, and renunciation. One who is in possession of all 6 of these opulences at the same time, who possesses them to an unlimited degree, is understood to be the Supreme Personality of Godhead. These opulences of the Godhead are delineated by Parashara Muni, a great Vedic authority. We have seen many rich persons, many powerful persons, many famous persons, many beautiful persons, many learned and scholarly persons, and persons in the renounced order of life unattached to material possessions. But we have never seen any one person who is unlimitedly and simultaneously wealthy, powerful, famous, beautiful, wise, and unattached, like Krishna, in the history of humanity. Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is a historical person who appeared on this earth 5,000 years ago. He stayed on this earth for 125 years and played exactly like a human being, but his activities were unparalleled. From the very moment of his appearance to the moment of his disappearance, every one of his activities is unparalleled in the history of the world, and therefore anyone who knows what we mean by Godhead will accept Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. No one is equal to the Godhead, and no one is greater than him. That is the import of the familiar saying, God is great. There are various classes of men in the world who speak of God in different ways, but according to the Vedic literatures and according to the great acharyas, the authorized persons versed in the knowledge of God in all ages, like Acharyas Sankara, Ramanuja, Madhva, Vishnu Swami, Lord Chaitanya, and all their followers by disciplic succession, all unanimously agree that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. As far as we, the followers of Vedic civilization, are concerned, we accept the Vedic history of the whole universe, which consists of different planetary systems called Svargaloka, or the higher planetary system, Martyaloka, or the intermediary planetary system, and Patala Loka, or the lower planetary system. The modern historians of this earth cannot supply historical evidence of events that occurred before 5,000 years ago, and the anthropologists say that 40,000 years ago, Homo sapiens had not appeared on this planet because evolution had not reached that point. But the Vedic histories, such as the Puranas and Mahabharata, relate human histories which extend millions and billions of years into the past. For example, from these literatures, we are given the histories of Krishna's appearance and disappearances millions and billions of years ago. In the 4th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna tells Arjuna that both he and Arjuna had had many births before, and that he, Krishna, could remember all of them, but Arjuna could not. This illustrates the difference between the knowledge of Krishna and that of Arjuna. Arjuna might have been a very great warrior, a well-cultured member of the Kuru dynasty, but after all, he was an ordinary human being, whereas Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is the possessor of unlimited knowledge. Because he possesses unlimited knowledge, Krishna has a memory that is boundless. Krishna's knowledge is so perfect that he remembers all the incidents of his appearances some millions and billions of years in the past. But Arjuna's memory and knowledge are limited by time and space, for he is an ordinary human being. In the 4th chapter, Krishna states that he can remember instructing the lessons of the Bhagavad Gita some millions of years ago to the sun god, Vivashvan. Nowadays, it is the fashion of the atheistic class of men to try to become God by following some mystic process. Generally, the atheists claim to be God by dint of their imagination or their meditational prowess. Krishna is not that kind of God. He does not become God by manufacturing some mystic process of meditation, nor does he become God by undergoing the severe austerities of the mystic yogic exercises. Properly speaking, he never becomes God because he is the Godhead in all circumstances. Within the prison of his maternal uncle Kamsa, where his father and mother were confined, Krishna appeared outside his mother's body as the four-handed Vishnu Narayan. Then he turned himself into a baby and told his father to carry him to the house of Nanda Maharaj and his wife Yashoda. When Krishna was just a small baby, the gigantic demoness Putana attempted to kill him, but when he sucked her breast, he pulled out her life. That is the difference between the real Godhead and a God manufactured in the mystic factory. Krishna had no chance to practice the mystic yoga process. Yet he manifested himself as the Supreme Personality of Godhead at every step, from infancy to childhood, from childhood to boyhood, and from boyhood to young manhood. In this book, Krishna, all of his activities as a human being are described. Although Krishna plays like a human being, he always maintains his identity as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Since Krishna is all attractive, one should know that all his desires should be focused on Krishna. In the Bhagavad Gita, it is said that the individual person is the proprietor or master of his own body, but that Krishna, Hare Krishna, who is the super soul present in everyone's heart, is the supreme proprietor and supreme master of each and every individual. As such, if we concentrate our loving propensities upon Krishna only, then immediately universal love, unity, and tranquility will be automatically realized. When one waters the root of a tree, he automatically waters the branches, twigs, leaves, and flowers. When one supplies food to the stomach through the mouth, he satisfies all the various parts of the body. The art of focusing one's attention on the Supreme and giving one's love to him is called Krishna consciousness. We have inaugurated the Krishna consciousness movement so that everyone can satisfy his propensity for loving others simply by directing his love toward Krishna. The whole world is very eager to satisfy the dormant propensity of love for others, but the various invented methods like socialism, communism, altruism, humanitarianism, and nationalism, along with whatever else may be manufactured for the peace and prosperity of the world, are all useless and frustrating because of our gross ignorance of the art of loving Krishna. Generally, people think that by advancing the cause of moral principles and religious rights, they will be happy. Others may think that happiness can be achieved by economic development, and yet others think that simply by sense gratification they will be happy. But the real fact is that people can be happy only by loving Krishna. Krishna can perfectly reciprocate one's loving propensities in different relationships called mellows or rasas. Basically, there are 12 loving relationships. One can love Krishna as the supreme unknown, as the supreme master, the supreme friend, the supreme child, the supreme lover. These are the 5 basic love rasas. One can also love Krishna indirectly in 7 different relationships, which are apparently different from the 5 primary relationships. All in all, however, if one simply reposes his dormant loving propensity in Krishna, then his life becomes successful. This is not a fiction, but is a fact that can be realized by practical application. One can directly perceive the effects that love for Krishna has on his life. In the 9th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, the science of Krishna consciousness is called the king of all knowledge, the king of all confidential things, and the supreme science of transcendental realization. Yet we can directly experience the results of the science of Krishna consciousness because it is very easy to practice and is very pleasurable. Whatever percentage of Krishna consciousness we can perform will become an eternal asset to our life, for it is imperishable in all circumstances. It has now been actually proved that today's confused and frustrated younger generation in the Western countries can directly perceive the results of channeling the loving propensity toward Krishna alone. It is said that although one executes severe austerities, penances, and sacrifices in his life, if he fails to awaken his dormant love for Krishna, then all his penances are to be considered useless. On the other hand, if one has awakened his dormant love for Krishna, then what is the use in executing austerities and penances unnecessarily? The Krishna consciousness movement is the unique gift of Lord Chaitanya to the fallen souls of this age. It is a very simple method which has actually been carried out during the last four years in the Western countries, and there is no doubt that this movement can satisfy the dormant loving propensities of humanity. This book, Krishna, is another presentation to help the Krishna consciousness movement in the Western world. This transcendental work of literature is published with profuse illustrations. People love to read various kinds of fiction to spend their time and energy. Now this tendency can be directed to Krishna. The result will be the imperishable satisfaction of the soul, both individually and collectively. It is said in the Bhagavad Gita that even a little effort expended on the path of Krishna consciousness can save one from the greatest danger. Hundreds of thousands of examples can be cited of people who have escaped the greatest dangers of life due to a slight advancement in Krishna consciousness. We therefore request everyone to take advantage of this great transcendental literary work. One will find that by reading one page after another, an immense treasure of knowledge in art, science, literature, philosophy, and religion will be revealed. And ultimately, by reading this one book, Krishna, love of Godhead will fructify. My grateful acknowledgement is due to Sriman George Harrison, now chanting Hare Krishna, for his liberal contribution of $19,000 to meet the entire cost of printing this volume. May Krishna bestow upon this nice boy further advancement in Krishna consciousness. And at last, my ever-willing blessings are bestowed upon Sriman Sham Sundar Das Adhikari, Sriman Brahmananda Das Brahmachari, Sriman Hayagriva Das Adhikari, Sriman Satswarup Das Adhikari, Srimati Devahuti Devi Dasi, Srimati Jadurani Devi Dasi, Sriman Muralidhar Das Brahmachari, Sriman Bharadvaj Das Adhikari, and Sriman Pradyumna Das Adhikari, etc., for their hard labor in different ways to make this publication a great success. Hare Krishna.
Om Gyanatimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurmilitam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah Shri Chaitanya Manopistam Stapitam Jena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Shapadantikam Vandehang Shri Guru Shri Jatapadakamalang Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raganatan Vitam Stam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savatutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lolita Sri Vishakhan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dina Bandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kamshana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Prashabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hori Priye Vanchako Pitarubhyascha Kripa Sindho Bhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaur Bhaktarinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So this is Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, a summary study of the 10th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. After dedicating the book, Srila Prabhupada begins by explaining the meaning of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And he establishes that Krishna was a historical person, although not a person on the same level as an ordinary human being. Nivrittatarshar upagiyamanam bhavosadat strotamano biramat ka uttama shloka gunanavadat puman virajyeta vina bashugna. At the time the book was published, this verse, the translation for this verse was not available, but it means that those who are free from, who are done with the thirst for material enjoyment, Nivritta Trishna, can chant and hear this Srimad Bhagavatam. And Shrotrapin Bhavoshadach, this is the remedy for birth and death, Bhavoshadhi. And hearing these topics is pleasing to the ear, pleasing to the heart. So who will not be willing to give oral reception to this wonderful book? Binapashuna, except a person who's killing animals or killing himself. So Prabhupada begins his preface with that verse, and we'll see what, and of course we have an acknowledgement of George Harrison's contribution, both his financial contribution and his foreword, which has helped sell a lot of books. And now we can begin. If there are any questions first, we can take them. Otherwise, we'll push ahead. Yes.
Maharaj, here it was written that one can relate to Krishna in any of the 12 rasas, and then first is one who relates to him as a supreme unknown. So the people who chant Om, knowing that there is some person God, but they don't know the name, and they chant Om. So do they achieve this kind of position?
They may gradually. Otherwise, if they remain on the impersonal platform, they don't go very far. But if they come to appreciate that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, even though they may not render active service, then they're on this platform.
So what is the meaning of supreme unknown?
Supreme unknown, yeah. That means, of course, supreme unknown, the meaning is clear. The sages in Shantarasa are just above the impersonal platform. That's the description that Srila Prabhupada gives. Like the Kumaras, they were on the impersonal platform, but then they saw the personality of Godhead, so they became attracted. So that's the neutral stage. We may not render active service, but we appreciate. Is that all right?
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Raj, I wanted to ask a little bit like a historical question. At the end, I see it's written ISKCON headquarters, Los Angeles, California.
Mm-hmm.
So can you say something more like, I thought that New York were the headquarters of ISKCON at that time, or?
At this time, of course, we had only a few centers: New York, Montreal, Los Angeles, San Francisco, London was started, a few others. But some time before, we'd acquired that temple property on Watseka Avenue. New York, our temple had moved from 26 Second Avenue to 61 Second Avenue. The 61 Second Avenue was a modest place, really, one flight up. And we had a temple in Boston. That building we owned. That was our press building and temple. But Watseka Avenue was really quite the place. We'd purchased a church there. You've been there? No. We'd purchased a church there, and it had an adjoining building that was also part of the church complex. And we purchased some apartment buildings on the block. So we really had and we installed large Radha Krishna deities there. So this was now quite the place. And Srila Prabhupada also liked it there. The weather was good for his health. It was a good place for him to work. And with all this facility, Prabhupada set out to make it an ideal Krishna conscious center. So he invited, in turn, various GBC members and temple presidents to come to Los Angeles and see how things were doing. Prabhupada was doing things, how the deity was installed, how everything was arranged. Even I remember in Boston and other such places, up till that time, I think we had carpets in the temple room. Wall-to-wall carpets, American style. But in Los Angeles, of course, they took out all such things, and they had a nice marble floor. So this was part of our standard, or what would become our standard. Prabhupada was teaching Vishnu Jan Maharaj, guiding him in kirtan. Everything was being set, how to run the accounts, how to hold the programs. It's already going on in other places, but here Srila Prabhupada wanted to set a high standard. And I remember after our temple president visited, then he came back to Boston and instituted this and this and this and this, as he'd seen in LA. So Prabhupada had the idea that Los Angeles would be the world headquarters at that time. Of course, later Vrindavan, Mayapur became prominent, as well as Bombay and so on. But at this early stage, this was really our flagship temple. Los Angeles, kirtan parties going on. Everything was going on elsewhere, but to a high standard, Los Angeles. So that was the world headquarters.
The printing of the books was going on where, in Boston or in LA?
The printing was going on in two places. One was Boston, we had our own press, and the other was Japan, where we were working with Dynapan Printing Company, a very large Japanese printer. The press was something Srila Prabhupada very much was keen to do, and we had all the necessary parts from typesetting equipment, layout, arrangements for laying out the books, photography, what they call mechanical photography for shooting films for printing, plate making, and finally printing and binding. It was all done in Boston. And a group of Prabhupada's disciples had been learning the printing trade to do all these things. But the quality was not very good. The presses were one-color presses. So they'd print black and white, and if you wanted to print something in color, like a cover or illustrations, you had to send the sheet through the press 4 times, each time with a different color ink. And they had to line up exactly. It's what's called registration, which is a system for making sure that everything's exactly aligned, so that each time it passes through the press, passes through the same way, and you get a proper image. Not so easy to do. And a lot of it had its shortcomings. The result had its shortcomings. Apart from that, the binding was not very good at all. In fact, when the first copies of Nectar of Devotion reached Srila Prabhupada in Los Angeles, I think the binding just gave way and pages were slipping out. So we printed there some of these chapter by chapter books of second canto Bhagavatam, then Nectar of Devotion, some issues of Back to Godhead, and some small books. But then after some time, but the big books, Prabhupada had done his first book, Teachings of Lord Chaitanya, with Dinapan, and they produced books to a very high professional quality. And they also gave reasonable prices and excellent terms. So for Krishna book, Srila Prabhupada turned to Dinapan again. And similarly, other books, Bhagavad Gita as it is, and other big books, we were printing commercially or with commercial printers. The press operation itself, the printing operation, was gradually phased out as unnecessary, not economical, and also the press workers weren't following a good standard of sadhana, so that created problems too. And if you want good equipment, it's expensive, so you have to keep it running all the time, which meant they were taking on commercial work, and it wasn't, the whole enterprise proved ultimately unsatisfying, and so it was given up. But what they call the pre-press work, all that continued in New York City. The editing, proofreading, typesetting, layout, mechanical photography, and so on. All of that was being done in New York, and we would provide films to the printer. That also saved us some money. You could just send a manuscript, or you could just send pages typeset. But by taking it all the way through films, we saved some money. So we had the equipment, so we did that. But from the beginning, the Krishna book was published printed by Dinapan in Japan. And we printed quite a number of books with them. Prabhupada liked them.
When everything moved to Los Angeles? Later?
It moved like in 1975, I think. It moved from New York to Los Angeles. The history there basically is that the printing and editing and press work were being done in New York, and the warehousing and marketing and distribution were being done from LA, with one person in charge in New York and one person in charge in LA. And both of those in charges had spiritual problems and weren't able to continue. So Srila Prabhupada asked Rameshwar Das Brahmachari if he would be willing to take over supervising that work, press work. So Rameshwar, who was a brahmachari in Los Angeles, said that he could, but only if everything were in one place. So Srila Prabhupada agreed, and that one place became Los Angeles. Later, when Bombay temple was under construction, wouldn't have been too much later, 1976 maybe, I was with Srila Prabhupada in Bombay, and Prabhupada asked me what I thought about moving press headquarters to Bombay. And he had the idea that it could be one bungalow for English, one for French, one for German, one for Spanish, so on. And we'd heard about that idea, but now Prabhupada put it to me. What did I think? First he'd ask me, how do you like it here in Bombay? And back in those days, we would come to India, just for the Mayapur Vrindavan festival. So we would stay for a month, maybe, between Mayapur and Vrindavan. And now, for the first time, I was coming to Bombay. What do you think about? So he asked me how I liked it. And I was sort of non-committal. Everything smelled of fish there from the seashore. And India was a place that we weren't used to living in. We didn't really know how to live in India properly, so health was always an issue. And so it seemed, and the big problem was we were using high-end typesetting equipment that needed careful calibration and adjustment and sort of technical oversight, which would have been essentially impossible in Bombay. Even in America, it was a little problematic, but in Bombay, it would have been impossible. So I expressed that to Srila Prabhupada, and Prabhupada accepted that, yes, doesn't look like a plan that can work. Retrospectively, it would have been wonderful if we could have all been, as Prabhupada said, packed up tightly in one place in Bombay, all of the different languages working together and so on. It would have been sublime, but it didn't seem like it was possible. Sometimes I think somehow we should have just pushed it through. Prabhupada wanted it, but I don't know technologically how we could have pulled that off. And anyway, it didn't happen. And now, of course, there are BBT divisions all over the world, and I think there's no question of converging in Bombay at this point. And technology has changed so that things we used to do with $60,000 machines, well, $20,000. Forget how much that equipment cost. Anyway, very expensive machines can now be done on your desktop. So that the world has moved forward. But that's an answer to your question. Not directly Krishna's pastimes, but for those who are interested in the history, there we are. Yes?
what did you think of George Harrison's writing at the beginning of this book? And also, what was the mood amongst the devotees? Because I imagine it would have been a great preaching tool to, promote Krishna book. George Harrison wrote this.
What did I think of it? Well, it was certainly impressive that, I mean, George Harrison was hugely influential at that time. The Beatles were the rage, especially among young people. They were, God was up here, and then there were the Beatles. So that, and it was known at that time that George was sort of Eastern looking. There was, he was learning sitar and all of that sort of thing. So he was seen as being somewhat of a spiritual figure. There was a spiritual component to the hippie counterculture of the time. And so that George Harrison was writing had written a foreword was certainly impressive. It was a stamp of approval from a great authority for so many people, a source of inspiration really for many people. As far as the writing goes, I thought it was okay. I think George had a little help from his friends, that is to say from Shamsundar Prabhu. Well, I never met George, and so I don't know, what his understanding was. I know that we weren't his only source of spiritual input, but at the same time, he was chanting Hare Krishna and was hearing from Srila Prabhupada and was quite serious about spiritual life in many ways. So Prabhupada called him a nice boy. And as an editor, the all caps was a little much. Editors don't think highly of all caps, but it was George Harrison, so you let it be. As far as the book distributors, they loved it. They could just open the book and show that, and people would right away be interested, or they'd have, a very strong hook there with George Harrison's forward. It certainly gets transcendental credit for helping so many people to come to Krishna consciousness. I know some devotees who, especially in the UK, many devotees really were.
That was my very loud. That was my key forward, and every time I used to do book distribution, I just opened to George Harrison, and I was like, "Oh wow, George Harrison forward," and they would look at it, they read it, and like, "Yes, I would like the book." So they were very interested and keen, just because George Harrison wrote the forward.
Yeah. So then there you are. And now I don't know, it just doesn't have quite the same effect. But still he's a historically recognized person. And he's made an eternal contribution. The forward plus $19,000. A story which you can read about in Shamsundar's Chasing the Rhino book. Yes.
Raj, little bit more. Can you say about these names at the end? Shri Prabhupada is saying thanks to
Oh,
this.
who these people were.
Yes.
Okay, sure.
What kind of
Contribution.
service they were doing?
Well, Shyam Sundar Prabhu, of course, was the person who brought George Harrison on board. He was one of Prabhupada's intimate associates. He was one of the early or original members of the governing body commission. He was a flamboyant person also in many ways. He was one of the original devotees who went to London and established Krishna consciousness there in a very short time and very dramatically. He'd carved the first Jagannath deities. He was one of the original devotees in ISKCON San Francisco. So he went back a long way with Srila Prabhupada. And you can read more about his life and exploits in his multi-part book, Chasing the Rhinos with the Swami. So that's Shyam Sundar Prabhu. Brahmananda Prabhu was the original president of ISKCON and ISKCON New York, which was the original ISKCON. And continued as temple president for some time. While he was temple president there, he also took charge of overseeing the ISKCON press operations that were going on in Boston. And he helped, even before that, before the Boston place opened, he'd helped Prabhupada print teachings of Lord Chaitanya. He'd gone there to Japan to expedite the printing of TLC. So he was involved, and he was overseeing the work of ISKCON Press from sort of a higher level oversight, not day-to-day operations, but higher level oversight of the press work in Boston, where the Krishna book was produced. Later, Brahmananda Prabhu took sannyas. He preached in Africa. He did many services for Srila Prabhupada and was a wonderful devotee. Big B, we used to call him when he was temple president. Big B, he was big.
Really nice excerpt in his book, Swami. There's a really nice excerpt in his book, Swamiji, as to how he got Bhagavad Gita printed as it is, the first Macmillan copy.
Yes, he also got Bhagavad Gita printed, the first abridged edition with the Macmillan Company. That's also a wonderful story. And many other, in Prabhupada Lilamrita, you can read more about Brahmananda Prabhu. He figures in many of Prabhupada's programs, especially early in the history of the movement. He was also one of the original members, I believe, of the ISKCON Corporation, the original International Society for Krishna Consciousness, Inc. And he was like Prabhupada's right-hand man, practically speaking, at that time. And Prabhupada wanted something done. Brahmananda was there. And very sweet and very affectionate to Srila Prabhupada. You can say more and more. Hayagriva Prabhu was the editor of Bhagavad Gita as it is, and he was the editor for the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, Easy Journey to Other Planets, the small books, and the Krishna book up through Krishna's departure from Vrindavan, I believe. I think that's where he left off. He was on the faculty of Ohio State University. He had an MA in English. He was also an original, I think, member of the governing body commission. He was a colorful sort of person. He kept a big beard and he had some admiration, I think, for Allen Ginsberg, and cut a similar profile in some ways. But he took seriously, it's historical how he met Srila Prabhupada on the streets of the Lower East Side. Are you from India? And the rest, as they say, was history. And it was certainly fortunate that here was someone who wanted to write and publish books, and here was an English teacher and an English instructor at a major American university. So Hayagriva made that contribution, and especially for the Krishna book, he was the main editor. Satsrup Maharaj did some preliminary editing, but the main editing was done by Hayagriva Prabhu. He also had a role in the founding of New Vrindavan and other things also. He played a pivotal role in the Swamiji is God incident as one of the one of the GBC men who sort of went off and said, wait a second, Swamiji never said he was God. So what is this? So that was also a nice part of his contribution. Satsvarupa Dasadikari, later Satsvarup Das Goswami, is of course our most prolific author in ISKCON. He was also one of the original members of the governing body commission, and perhaps an original board member of ISKCON Inc. He joined in New York City, and so much of that history is recorded. He began as he was typing manuscripts for Srila Prabhupada. Prabhupada would dictate, and Satsvarup Maharaj would type. He would also keep notes of Prabhupada's lectures, and he was doing the initial editing for the Krishna book and for other publications, for which Hayagriva did the later editing. He was also pioneer in Boston, first temple president there in Boston. Then when the GBC was established, he became a GBC man, and Prabhupada first married him to Jadharani because she had no one to take care of her, and later, not that much later, gave him sannyas. He was a leading figure in many activities in ISKCON. Of course, he became one of the first initiating spiritual masters in ISKCON, and has just made many, he preached in Latin America, like the Caribbean and so on, and in different parts of America. He was in charge of the Library Party, which was a program very pleasing to Srila Prabhupada that distributed books in libraries throughout the country, and then later in Europe and elsewhere. for some time he traveled with Srila Prabhupada as his personal secretary. And he was very strong on fidelity. I guess I should say that. Hayagriva Prabhu was very, very good in English, but sometimes his understanding...
You'll have to turn off airplane mode.
I wonder whether that's a message. Anyway, he wasn't known for deeply understanding the philosophy or for always sort of getting it right as far as keeping to what Prabhupada's intention was. Hard to do that if you don't really have a deep understanding of the philosophy. There was another editor, Ray Rama, who left rather early, but he was the editor of Teachings of Lord Chaitanya. His English skills may not have been as polished as Hayagriva's, but he had a very good understanding of the teachings. And so from that point of view, his editing was appreciated by Srila Prabhupada. Satsrup Maharaj had very clear understanding of what Prabhupada was teaching, and his editorial philosophy was one of being, strictly adherent to what Prabhupada was saying. Whatever Prabhupada said, that's what should be there, and it should be faithfully transmitting the teachings that Prabhupada gave. So Satsrup Maharaj as an editor was really exemplary in that regard. His adherence, first of all, his understanding of what Prabhupada was saying, and then because he understood it, his editing could reflect that. Satsrup Maharaj continues to serve Srila Prabhupada. He's living in a small little, not even community, a small little enclave of devotees in upstate New York, living a peaceful existence, encouraging devotees and continuing to write and write at the age of 83. And he has a daily broadcast of Bhagavatam readings and really wonderful activities. I can't even count how many books he's written. It's just huge. And especially the life of Prabhupada, which has been translated in so many languages. Anyway, a whole class could be given about, several classes about Satsrup Maharaj, but we're trying to be brief. Srimati Devahuti Devi Dasi was an elderly lady who joined the Hare Krishna movement in late 1960s or early 1970s. Her daughter also joined Indumati Dasi, and Devahuti was a lovely devotee, a very, very nice lady, and really sort of someone who needed a lot of determination to stick to Krishna consciousness at a time when the temple was all kids. Everybody was a teenager or... Boston is where I remember her, although she didn't start in Boston. I forget where she started, whether it was Los Angeles or someplace else. But when we got that Boston temple, well, Jadharani was always, not always, but she moved from New York to Boston, and that became the center of the art department, Boston. And when we got that larger temple, then they called artists from different parts of the country to assist. Bharat Raj Prabhu came, Muralidhar Prabhu came, Parikshit Prabhu, and other artists to work with Jadharani, and especially to paint for the Krishna book. This was the first book where there was really a a project to provide a lot of illustrations. And this is part of Prabhupada's genius for the Krishna book also. There were, many publications of Krishna literature. Bhagavad Gita had been published in many editions by different people. Gita Press had published Srimad Bhagavatam. But this was really the first time that such profuse illustrations had gone into a book of this sort. Srila Prabhupada had the desire to profusely, in fact, originally he wanted that more illustrations than the book included, a higher number. I think some compromise was made, perhaps because of cost, or perhaps because we just didn't have the people to do them. But I think he wanted more. And his original idea was that the illustrations would appear at the place where the particular pastime was described, what they call tipped in, which means each illustration, each page with an illustration, inserted by a separate method in its actual place, and ideally covered with what they call onion skin paper. So you'd have the onion skin page, and then you'd have the illustration page. That was, you see old books done that way before the advent of sort of modern, super-fast, highly industrialized printing. But in the older days, when books were printed, in print shops by printers, this was a system, and if you're collectors of old books, will still have books like that with an illustration and onion skin and everything in its actual place. But that would have been very expensive in the context of modern printing, like at Dynapon and so on. It would have priced the book very high. But here were all these illustrations and color illustrations. It wasn't uncommon to see a book with illustrations, but usually they'd be black and white, and they'd be just part of the regular printing. And there might be color illustrations for books on architecture and this. The color illustrations were not at all unknown, but a book of Indian philosophy profusely just illustrated with bright and colorful illustrations, and that was something never seen before. Gita Press had a few illustrations in their books, but nothing on the scale of Krishna book. And original new illustrations by Western devotees. Prabhupada guided them what should be there, what shouldn't be there, how he wanted it. And that's a whole history, the history of the art department, with Jadharani Dasi as the original artist. So that was all done. And Prabhupada would give very explicit directions to the artists. This should be like this should be why you have done this, and basically training them to follow the text very closely, and answering questions that that the text wouldn't answer for you. Who should have a beard, who should not have a beard, what kind of tilak they should have, all sorts of details. So coming back to the question, Devahuti was a lovely lady, and something of must have undergone considerable difficulties in a society of all teenagers, and especially teenagers who didn't really know how to respect their elders, or even how to provide for their elders. What does an elderly lady need? Here we are, little brahmacharis and brahmacharinis living on bunk beds in brahmachari ashrams and so on. And you have an older lady. She was quite a bit older. So her needs would have been different, and must have been more than considerable inconvenience for her, psychologically and physically, to live in with the devotees. But she did, and her art is lovely. The original Rasa dance picture done for the Krishna book was Devahuti's illustration. And I think it's still the best I've seen of all the Rasa dance illustrations. The Krishna and the gopis all look very young and innocent. The colors were all beautiful. Everything's as described. There's a charm to that painting. It's really lovely. And when it was replaced later by a more realistic, Renaissance-influenced version, Prabhupada was furious. And you can hear from Rameshwar Prabhu about that, how Prabhupada, I think, yelled at him about it. He said it looked like a hippie dance, and why had this been done without his permission, and so many things. Prabhupada, that illustration and others. No. Yeah, maybe in the book. I can't say what's in which book, why, but there's an earlier illustration. This one is not the one. The one that's in your app there is not the one. But it's a beautiful illustration and very innocent and charming. Let's see what you've got. Yes, I think. Yes, this is the one. I guess, we can turn it on its side. Oops. And it looks to me, and now that somehow or other I touched something and got a picture of Krishna stealing the gopis' clothes, that may also have been Devahuti. And the original cover of Nectar of Devotion with Radha and Krishna on the swing, I don't know if you've seen that. That's also Devahuti's illustration. Thank you. So she had a very nice, pleasant style, realistic but not slavish to the Renaissance, and bright and colorful, and really lovely art. And she was a lovely person also. And her daughter was a good devotee. So that's Devahuti. Jadharani Devi Dasi. Told a little something about Jadharani, our original artist, the original girl in ISKCON, first lady to join ISKCON, I think. I think she predates the San Francisco group. She's the original. I think so. And certainly the original artist. She's written a memoir called The Art of Spiritual Life, which tells of her experiences with Srila Prabhupada and the guidance that he gave her in her life and in her art. She received many, many personal instructions from Srila Prabhupada, and Prabhupada took great interest in her personal welfare, physical welfare and spiritual welfare. And she has a photographic memory, could remember so many things, great memory for verses, sound grasp of the sound command of the philosophy. When we were in New York, she would give classes regularly, and people said that she and I gave the best classes, and hers were better than mine. She, of course, painted many, many, many paintings, and was also a top of the line book distributor. Really a strong preacher and book distributor, as well as sort of the guide for all the girls who would come and join there in Boston. So they're certainly one of the prominent figures in the Hare Krishna movement in its early days and throughout Prabhupada's time. Sometime after Srila Prabhupada's departure, she became associated with Srila Bhaktivedanta Narayan Maharaj, and she's serving in that Sangha. And but has, naturally kept her dedication to Srila Prabhupada as well. Muralidhar was a brahmachari, later married, and I forget where he came from. Not New York, but he came to New York and Boston, or Boston first, then New York. He was an excellent artist. He, some of the, I think, finest illustrations that we've done, or that we published, were done by Muralidhar Prabhu. One example? I'm trying to think of one that Muralidhar did. Yeah, there's Radha Krishna and the 8 Gopis. That's Muralidhar's work. Krishna and returning at the end of the day and being greeted with open arms by Nanda and Yashoda. That's Muralidhar's painting. There was an earlier version that Jadharani did, but the one that you see now, I think, is Muralidhar's. The picture of Krishna dancing on Kaliya's head is done with an airbrush, which appeared on the cover of one of the books. It was also Muralidhar's work, and many, many. A beautiful command of detail, Muralidhar. For some time he lived in New Vrindavan also later. And yeah. The artists used to work as a team, so many of the paintings are painted by several artists working together. Sometimes someone painting the background, someone painting the faces, someone doing this, someone doing that, or working in different ways. The whole process Jadharani tells about in her book. Bharat Raj is another of the original artists. I think he joined in Montreal, although I'm not sure about that. These are all American devotees, by the way. He's, what would you say, the most creative of the artists in terms of conceptualizing a vision for a picture. I think the other artists looked to him especially for that. He's had a real innovative and a real creative flair and an ability to visualize how a scene might be portrayed. And he's done many of the BBT illustrations. He's one of Prabhupada's favorite kirtaniyas, Bharat. He was stayed for some time in India. Prabhupada at one point asked him to take charge of the project of creating dioramas, learning what Prabhupada called doll making, making these figures that are produced in Mayapur and elsewhere with straw and mud and so on, so that you get a finished deity. Because Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur had such theistic exhibitions done with such dolls. So Prabhupada wanted Bharat and his wife Rukmini to take charge of that. The well-known Kirtaniya give me a moment. I just dropped him out of my mind, or rather dropped his name out of my mind. Gauravani Das is Bharat son. And he was very dear to Srila Prabhupada. Pradumna Panditji, our original Sanskrit scholar, he also was living in Boston early on and learned Sanskrit he sort of just got a little bit of a start, and Prabhupada encouraged him. And from just being the person who put in the diacritic marks, he became, as time went by, a great scholar of Sanskrit. He's worked on all of Srila Prabhupada's books, practically speaking. You've seen the picture, you've seen the videos of him reading to Srila Prabhupada from the Acharya commentaries in Prabhupada's last days, working on Srimad Bhagavatam. He been teaching Sanskrit at Rutgers University in America for a while. He did some teaching. He's done some private, you can say, teaching or small class Sanskrit teaching. Very learned in many branches of Vedic understanding, whether it's Mimamsa or Sankhya or Jyotish or this or that. He's very widely read, very eclectic mind. He's living in the Bhakti Center in New York. Yeah. He was also the first person to clearly identify what was wrong, what was going wrong in ISKCON at the time, that there were 11 zonal acharyas who were being touted as the be all and end all, or as everyone's spiritual masters back at the time, and were we won't talk about all of it, but he wrote a very humble and siddhantically sound and culturally sound letter, just presenting that something, presenting what was and what should be, which earned him a lot of negative feedback from the powers that be at the time. And the GBC, I think decades later, issued an official apology because where they had been wrong, he had been right. He traveled, of course, wherever Prabhupada went. Once Prabhupada, picked him. He was working in Boston and New York, but then he joined Srila Prabhupada's traveling party so that Prabhupada had his Sanskrit editor right there with him. And I'm in the etc. category. There were many of us who were in the etc. category, working on different aspects of putting together the Krishna book. But these were the people that Prabhupada chose to recognize as the main people he wanted to thank for their contribution. And again, about all of these devotees, much more could be said. They're all glorious, and they've all made an eternally valuable contribution for the Krishna consciousness movement and for the world. So we're all in their debt for their hard labor in different ways to make this publication a great success. Who asked to be, was that your question, Tulsi? Thank you for asking that question. Very good. Okay, we can stop here and have kirtan.
Actually, I have one more, but maybe we can keep it for the next.
Yeah, I think we can stop here.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna,
Hare Krishna,
Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Hare
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare
Hare
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Krishna, Hare